We're supposed to eat to live, but it's easy to fall into living to eat. And of course, we need nutrition that food provides to fuel our bodies, but yet it's more than that, right? There's a blessing with food. We can be thankful that God gives us food to eat that's enjoyable. It's just the reality, right? When we have food, we get better attendance at a church event. And it's a good thing. But I think what happens is if you ignore God, food becomes something more. Your whole existence can become focused on finding delight in food or in just physical satisfaction, relationships or entertainment or whatever it is. And so I use the term hedonism. It's just a philosophical term from the Greek word for desire. And Jesus responds to that mindset if we continue back in Luke 17, verses 26 through 30. He says, just as it was in the days of Noah, so will it be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating and drinking and marrying, being given in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. And then he says, likewise, just as it was in the days of Lot. They were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building, but on the day when Lot went out from Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So will it be on the day when the Son of Man is revealed. So Jesus, in response to that kind of godless, hedonistic focus, he points us back to judgment. Right? That God has poured out his wrath twice in history. First, of course, he talks about the flood from Genesis 6 through 8. God revealed his plan to Noah and instructed him to build the ark. And people saw what was going on. 2 Peter 2:5, Peter even calls Noah a herald of righteousness. So Noah must have openly declared what was coming, and yet people chose to ignore it. They were too busy with all those normal things of life to heed that message. And then Jesus gives the second example of God's wrath being poured out, and it was the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? If you remember the story from Genesis, it tells us that God sends two angels in human form to rescue Lot and his family. Genesis 19 says the men of the city surround Lot's house because they want relations with these visitors. Lot begs them to abandon their wicked plan, but they accuse him of making himself a judge. Both of Lot's daughters are engaged, and so he warns those men about what's coming, and they think that he's joking. And so Jesus says the people of Sodom were just caught up in their eating, their drinking, their buying, their selling, all these other things, right? When fire and sulfur rained down from heaven. And Jesus envisions that the same sort of mindset is going to happen in the world when he returns. People will be caught up with fulfilling their desires. And even though we read in Scripture and we read in the book of Revelation about cataclysmic events and that sort of things, a lot of people will just ignore that. Right? They'll ultimately be called before the king to account for their behavior. The warning has been and will continue to be openly proclaimed, but people are just too caught up in their own desires to pay attention to it. That's the danger of hedonism, is that it deadens people to spiritual realities. That's interesting. Solomon makes that point back in the Old Testament in the book of Ecclesiastes. I mean, he took full advantage of his wealth to experience every earthly pleasure. And he really departs from the Lord and then comes back, it seems like, toward the end of his life in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, at the very end of the book. He says, verses 13 and 14, "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man, for God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil." So part of this The lure of hedonism is really just to deny the Lord's coming, to reject it, to not think about judgment at all. Does that have an influence in your life? Are you living for the Lord, or do you just treat him more like, the garnish alongside everything else in your life? Now, I'm not suggesting that we should live an ascetic lifestyle or anything like that. We should enjoy the blessings that God gives us, but he must be at the center of that delight. So don't succumb to the powerful pull of hedonism.